Dan Blocker's death shocked fans all over the world when he was only 43 years old. The man who played Hoss Cartwright on TV was suddenly gone. It felt way too early and too quick. The official story gave a sad but simple reason for his death. But behind that story was a bunch of questions that nobody could answer. Strange medical problems, weird things that didn't make sense, and rumors about how he was buried. All of this made people feel like something wasn't right. Some people said it was just Hollywood rumors. The rest was quietly forgotten. But now, more than 50 years later, new information is coming out that gives us a fresh look. It's challenging the story we've been told for years. For many people, the real ending might be way more disturbing than the one they thought they knew. Now, little Joe might have been the cute guy of the Cartwright family. He charmed viewers with his good looks and easy smile. But for many fans, it was actually Hoss, big, shy, and super kind, who really won their hearts. There was something so sweet about him. He was like a gentle giant with a boyish innocence and that special puppy dog sweetness. And here's the crazy part. Dan Blocker, the man who played Hoss, was already breaking records the moment he came into the world. He was born on December 10, 1928 in Dalb, Texas. He weighed an amazing 14 pounds at birth. He's still the heaviest baby ever born in Bowie County. Not long after Dan was born, his parents Ora Shack Blocker and Mary Arizona Blocker moved the family to O'Donnell, Texas. It was a small town about 40 miles south of Lubbock. Shack used to be a farmer but got hit hard by the Great Depression, but instead of giving up, he opened a small grocery store with what little money he had left. The family lived in the back of that store, barely getting by. Young Dan helped out wherever he could. He'd carry bags of groceries to customers' cars, put items on shelves, and basically acted as the store's gentle but huge helper. According to local stories, Shack used to joke that he'd pay someone to hire Dan just to stop the kid from accidentally breaking things in the store, because he was so big. Dan's size quickly became famous in O'Donnell, and he didn't just sit around. He used it. When a reporter from a news company once asked him if he had any experience with fighting, Blocker just smiled and said, "Yep." It turns out that on Saturday nights in that tiny West Texas town, locals would gather for fun, and often, the fun was watching Dan fight. They'd rope off part of the main street and Dan would fight anyone brave enough to challenge him. He became like a small-town fighter. He later said he never lost a fight. That was probably because even as a teenager he weighed 275 pounds and was 6 feet 3 inches tall. By the time he was 13, Dan had started going to the Texas Military Institute. There he quickly became a star on the football team as a linebacker. His strength and athletic ability earned him a scholarship to Sul Ross State University. There he kept playing football while studying English. At just 18 years old, he was already huge, nearly 300 pounds and still growing. But football wasn't what changed his life. It was a play. The university's drama club was putting on a play called Arsenic and Old Lace. They needed someone strong to move heavy props around the stage. Dan volunteered. They were so impressed with him that they gave him a small acting role, the crazy character Teddy Brewster. That one role lit a fire in him. Being on stage, hearing the crowd, feeling the energy, it all clicked. Dan Blocker was hooked. He changed his major from English to theater and never looked back. After graduating, he reportedly turned down chances to play professional football. Instead, he headed east to chase his dream of becoming a stage actor. He got experience in summer theater and other small theater groups. He slowly built up his resume and got better at acting. Eventually, he got a small part in a Broadway show called King Lear. But like so many young men back then, Dan Blocker didn't hesitate when his country needed him. He joined the army and was sent to fight in the Korean War. He served as a combat infantry sergeant with Company F, 2nd Battalion, 179th Infantry Regiment of the 45th Infantry Division. After landing in Incheon, Dan was already fighting on the front lines by Christmas Day in 1951. He and his fellow soldiers dug in at Chorwon, territory that's now part of North Korea. There they held the Jamestown Line, a fortified section of the front where the war had turned into a tense, exhausting standoff. It became a brutal game of back and forth, taking and retaking hills, fighting from trenches, and living in the thick of it for months. Blocker and the 179th Infantry Regiment stayed in that dangerous place for an incredible 209 days. At one point he was even wounded while rushing to help a fellow soldier. It was exactly the kind of bravery that would later show up in his TV character Hoss Cartwright. From December 1951 through June 1952, his unit was caught in the fierce battles over Porkchop Hill. It was a strategic high ground that helped control an important position called Old Baldy. It wasn't just the fighting that wore soldiers down. The summer heat, constant mud, and frayed nerves made everything worse. Finally, in July 1952, after months on the front lines, Blocker's unit was pulled back. He was sent to a hospital to recover from his injuries. By August, he was on his way, home with a Purple Heart medal. But when he returned to regular life in 1952, acting wasn't even part of the plan. What was part of the plan was a move to Los Angeles. That same year, he married his college sweetheart, Dolphia Parker. She was a tiny 5'3" Texan that everyone simply called Dolph. Together, they built a life far from the spotlight, raising 4 children, twin daughters Deborah Lee and Dana Lynn, and 2 sons David and Dirk. With a young family to support, Dan did what many returning soldiers did. He went back to school. He earned his master's degree in dramatic arts and started teaching high school English and drama in Sonora, Texas. Later, he taught 6th grade in New Mexico. Each job seemed to move him further west, a quiet shuffle toward his true calling. He genuinely loved teaching. He had a natural connection with kids and poured his passion for language and acting into the classroom. Friends and colleagues often said he had a heart of gold. Quick to get angry maybe, but just as quick to say sorry. Moving to California wasn't some fame-chasing gamble. It was about continuing his education. Dan enrolled at UCLA to work on his PhD in dramatic arts, all while still teaching on the side. But fate has a funny way of stepping in. One day while using a phone booth on campus, Blocker was spotted by a casting scout. With his towering frame and Texas look, he was a perfect fit for the explosion of TV westerns taking over screens at the time. And Dan knew it too. Being big has its advantages, he once said, especially when you're doing the rounds at agents' offices. They don't forget you in a hurry. From that moment, things started moving fast. He started getting small. Parts on classic Western TV shows, Gunsmoke, Colt 45, The Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, and Maverick. He'd pop up for an episode here and there. A few movie roles came his way too, but TV was where he really found his place. By 1957 to 1958, he had a regular spot on The Restless Gun, a post-Civil War cowboy series. The next year, he got a recurring role on Cimarron City. When that show was canceled, it may have felt like a dead end. But it turned out to be anything but. That cancellation opened the door for a role that would change everything. The lovable, larger-than-life Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza. In a show packed with colorful characters, if Little Joe was the heartthrob, Hoss was the heartbeat. Steady, strong, and deeply beloved. As the middle son of Ben Cartwright, a wealthy rancher living on the Ponderosa Ranch in Nevada, Hoss stood out for his sheer size, his simple nature, and his big heart. Ironically, the character was often shown as slow-witted, even gullible, a far cry from the real Dan Blocker, who was highly intelligent and incredibly thoughtful. Hoss may have been awkward, especially around women, and easily fooled by a well-played prank. But what made him unforgettable was his boundless compassion. That's where Blocker's spirit truly shined through. He poured warmth and empathy into the role, creating a character that touched viewers deeply, especially kids. Many felt that Hoss had a childlike innocence, and Blocker's genuine kindness gave him a soul audiences couldn't ignore. Blocker was inspired by a powerful quote from an 18th century Quaker missionary named Stephen Greyley. It deeply influenced the way he approached life and in many ways the character of Hoss. The idea that we only pass through life once and should offer kindness whenever possible became a guiding principle for him. As for Bonanza, it wasn't just another Western, it was a phenomenon. Airing during a time when the genre dominated American screens, Bonanza carved out a lasting legacy. It centered on the Cartwrights, Ben and his 3 sons, each with distinct personalities and storylines. What could have been a typical shoot-'em-up Western evolved into a character-driven drama about family, loyalty, and justice. But believe it or not, Bonanza almost didn't survive its first season. The ratings were terrible. Slotted against the popular courtroom drama Perry Mason on Saturday nights, the show couldn't even crack the top 30. NBC was ready to pull the plug. Then came the game-changing decision. The network moved Bonanza to Sunday nights at 9 p.m. It was a gamble, and it worked. The show found its audience and took off, going on to run for 14 seasons. Chevrolet jumped in as a major sponsor, and the show's ratings soared in season 2. Still, producing a color western in the late 1950s wasn't cheap. Each episode cost around $15,000, a staggering amount for the time, and frequently ran over budget. NBC's West Coast executive Thomas Sarnoff had to convince New York leadership not to cancel it. He promised to keep things in line financially, and he delivered. From there, Bonanza became a juggernaut, beloved in households across the country. Behind the scenes, Dan Blocker's connection to Hoss ran deep, sometimes too deep. In an interview with broadcaster Cactus Pryor, Blocker admitted that early in the series he had trouble separating himself from the character. For the first few seasons, he said, he was Hoss Cartwright almost around the clock. But as the series matured, so did his approach. Eventually, he learned to leave the character on set at night and pick him up again the next morning. During those long filming days, Blocker developed a close bond with his co-stars Lorne Greene and Michael Landon. The cast wasn't just acting like a family, they were a family, even off-set. Their friendship held strong. There was even a moment that captured Blocker's grit perfectly. While filming a scene, he was thrown off his horse and broke his collarbone. Instead of heading to the hospital, he reset the brake himself and pushed through the pain to finish the take. He did take a few weeks off afterward to recover, during which he gained a bit of weight. When he returned to set, there was a twist of poetic justice. The same horse that threw him couldn't carry him anymore. At one point in the 1960s, Dan Blocker wasn't just a television star, he was the television star. For a time, he was arguably the most recognizable actor on the planet. But with that level of fame came a price that hit harder than any scripted barroom brawl on the Ponderosa: the loss of his privacy. Despite his warm, approachable persona on screen, Blocker often found himself cornered by crowds overwhelmed by the very fans who adored him. One particularly telling moment came during the third season of Bonanza, when he tried to enjoy a simple outing, a baseball game with his sons Dirk and Dave. But what should have been a quiet family afternoon turned chaotic. Fans swarmed him for autographs, and the attention grew so intense that he had to gather his kids and leave before they even saw the first pitch, and it didn't stop at home. Even vacations turned into public appearances. On a trip to the Yucatan with his wife, hoping for a quiet escape, he was trailed by locals shouting, "Caballero," and of course, Hoss. There really was no such thing as getting away, not when his face was recognized nearly everywhere he went. It's the kind of thing people don't often think about, the quiet value of being unknown. For Blocker, the constant recognition became a burden. Fame had brought him wealth, yes, but also a deep discomfort. He openly wrestled with the idea of making so much money for acting, especially when he compared it to the modest pay of school teachers and public servants. He once confessed that the amount he earned felt absolutely immoral. At one point, he even tried to return to his old job as a teacher, but his former principal dismissed the idea, telling him bluntly that he'd always be seen as Hoss, not Mr. Blocker. However, he eventually found a way to step back from the chaos. In an interview with the Aniston Star, Blocker shared how he stumbled upon the idea of moving his family to Switzerland. The seed was planted by an issue of National Geographic, which featured a spread on the lake regions of Italy and Switzerland. He remembered being captivated. He and his wife had already been to Europe once, and he promised her that the next time, they'd explore that lake country. They made the trip in 1970, and it turned out to be a life-changing one. The family toured places like Lake Como, Lake Maggiore, and Lugano, a small Swiss town that completely stole Blocker's heart. He called it the most beautiful place he'd ever seen. To their surprise, they also found an American school right there, in Lugano, making it a perfect place to settle down. Later that year, the Blockers made the leap. They packed up and moved to Switzerland, looking not for luxury, but for peace. Blocker was especially excited for what the move would mean for his children: access to great education, the chance to learn multiple languages, and the ability to hop on a train and explore Europe with ease. For him, it felt like a new beginning. When word got out about the move, some people assumed it was about money, maybe a clever tax decision. But Blocker set the record straight. He was already a millionaire thanks to Bonanza. In fact, the move complicated things financially, introducing higher taxes and dual citizenship. So if anything, it cost him more. What really drew him to Lugano was the quiet. Like his Bonanza co-star James Arness, Blocker had little interest in Hollywood's glitz. He didn't want the spotlight chasing him down grocery aisles, and in Lugano, he found that space. Interestingly, while Bonanza aired on Swiss TV, it only played in German, and southern Switzerland, where Lugano sits, isn't a German-speaking region. That little detail wasn't lost on him. It made it even easier to blend in and live under the radar. By 1972, Dan Blocker and his family had fully settled in Switzerland. A peaceful change of pace, though it meant flying back to Los Angeles just to film Bonanza. It was a demanding routine, but Blocker remained committed to the show. Yet when he returned to the U.S. to start filming what would unknowingly become Bonanza's final season, something felt off. He was unusually tired, run down, and eventually checked into the hospital. That's when doctors discovered he needed gallbladder surgery. Now, a gallbladder removal, technically called a cholecystectomy, is a very common surgery. Every year, over 1 million Americans have the procedure done, and in most cases it's considered routine. For Blocker, the hope was that this surgery would finally put an end to the gallstone pain he'd been battling for a while. At first, things looked promising. He made it through the operation and his recovery seemed to be going well. There was a sense of relief, like he was finally getting back on track. But then, suddenly, and without much warning, tragedy struck. Blocker developed a pulmonary embolism, a blockage in one of the arteries in his lungs. It was swift and it was fatal. Just like that, he was gone. One moment he was hopeful and recovering, and the next his life had come to a heartbreaking end. After his untimely death, a strange and long-lasting rumor began to circulate, one that still lingers in pop culture conversations to this day. The story claimed that Dan Blocker, due to his large size, he weighed over 300 pounds, was buried in a piano box instead of a traditional casket. It's the kind of tale that blends a little truth with a lot of imagination, just enough to stick around for decades. The rumor likely got started because of Blocker's larger-than-life presence, both physically and personality-wise. People knew he was a big man, and when the topic of his burial came up, the idea of a regular casket not being enough started to spread. Add to that the emotional shock of his sudden death, and the story snowballed into a full-blown urban legend. But despite how dramatic and oddly compelling the image is, the truth is far more ordinary. Dan Blocker was buried in a standard casket at Woodlawn Cemetery in Santa Monica, California. The piano box story, while persistent, has no factual basis. It's just one of those myths that grew out of grief, admiration, and a tendency to sensationalize the passing of someone beloved. In the end, the piano box legend serves as a reminder of how quickly stories can take on a life of their own, especially when they involve a figure as iconic and cherished as Dan Blocker.